Welcome to Training Unleashed, the show that will help you design and deliver training that's off the chain and will make a difference. Now, here's your host, Evan Hackel.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Training Unleashed. We're going to have a really exciting show today. We're going to be talking about software, and we're, of course, going to be talking about training. My guest is Ian Robinson. He is with Enliven. Before we get started, of course, I need to thank my sponsors, C-Suite TV, C-Suite Radio. Ian, one of the things you say is a successful project is one that uses software as a means of making people's daily lives and jobs more enjoyable. Now, I like that, but what in the world does that mean?
It means as pain-free as possible, right? So I think in our organizational cultures, we've normalized a lot of painful software experiences. And my very noble work in the world is to try and reduce that suffering as much as I can. It doesn't have to be that bad.
You know, it is kind of a noble thing when you think about it, because I do think, you know, most software is difficult. I think people usability, people understanding, if all software could be intuitive would be amazing. So, I know we're going to talk about training, but we're going to first start talking about technology.
Sure. What
are the opportunities that companies have to make the companies better by utilizing technology in a better way?
And I think that there are probably many, and a lot of them fall back to kind of efficiency and productivity, kind of generic things that everybody wants more of.
Sure.
And I think the most interesting way to me to get at those kind of indirectly is by creating this very personal kind of organizational specific digital work environment that's imbued with their worldview and culture. And those things, when that helps you to make intuitive software, that then, practices are followed, people are onboarded more easily, maybe the need for elaborate training on a system, and then the implementation of that system is collapsed a little bit because the worldview and the processes, the workflows, all of that is directly expressed in the software. So I think the things that, and what organizations have to gain almost goes back to, well, first, pain reduction, right? You want to go find all of the nooks and crannies throughout your processes and your systems and remove as much overhead and frustration as possible, because these are real humans you're employing, and they don't feel good when they're mistreated, and the software shouldn't mistreat them either.
I think that's a good thing. I know that you are an advocate for custom built solutions, solutions that are, like a good suit, so to speak, perfectly tailored for the company.
Yeah, I like that.
Versus, buying something you can buy off the shelf. And I know it's like really tempting to buy something off the shelf because, what there used to be a saying in technology, no one got fired by choosing IBM, probably no one's been fired by choosing Salesforce or HubSpot or something of that nature.
Sure.
What are the advantages of custom solutions versus buying off the shelf that's been, millions of dollars have been spent on?
Well, and I'd say that buying something off the shelf, that product was created for really to be used by as many companies as possible. So it wasn't created for you. It was created for people like you. And for things like accounting, that's fine, right? And unless you're a very creative accountant, I guess. But there are often models and systems that we have within organizations where they really are similar from one organization to the next. And those best practices are really established at an industry level and those can be baked into products that serve everybody. So I'm most interested, like, I love that stuff, and you should use off-the-shelf software when it makes sense. I'm more interested in all of the cases where it doesn't make sense, because there's something lost if you just use something off the shelf, or you don't really, the most obvious option is when you really don't have something
So
available.
why don't we make this easier for everyone to understand? Can
Sure,
you kind of
sure.
give an example? Maybe, you don't need to use a company name, but maybe a case study. Hey, this is what we
Yeah.
found and this is
Well,
what we did.
yeah. So the first example that I'm thinking of is it's from the healthcare space. It's specifically auditing. So they'd go in and do audits for risks of all different sorts inside of a hospital system. And that's something where you can, well, you could find off the shelf systems to help you manage workflow and kind of document processes. But this organization in particular had really developed their own, they had a pretty strong worldview. They had a lot of expertise and a lot of experience. And so they took the opportunity to build their own, just like, to make things easier on everybody, right? Because now it's all in everybody, it's in the organizational language, right? We're all using the same words. We all have the same kind of worldview, workflows, the tools are all right there. But my favorite part about it was their kind of knowledge management was very involved in feeding learnings from each engagement back into the software. So those leading practices, whatever it might be, were just baked right in. And people who came to that company from working at similar companies, said, I couldn't go back now. Like, I feel so supported by this software. It's like, well, they were using software at the other companies too. Everybody's using some sort of software. But the idea of this custom software just being a direct expression of their worldview, their culture, their processes, there was no middle layer for people to have to interpret. And they didn't leave all of that potential on the table either by just, using an off-the-shelf solution.
So how big does a company need to be to sit there? Like, you're a two-person company, you're not going to build a custom piece of software. I mean, it's just not
Typically
economic.
Typically
Right.
not, right?
So how big a company needs to be where they would say, look, we really need to look at custom software, and it sounds like you're really talking about workflow.
Yeah, and it's data and tools together.
Yeah.
And that always ends up being some amount of workflow, kind of role-based collaboration is a good, good catch-all phrase. But it's bringing all of those things together. And I think that really, it can be smaller than this, but if you've got 100 or hundreds of employees, like, you're starting to get into the world of, it might be worth it. Again, depending on what kind of expertise you have. If you have some really novel approaches to your business that you can't just buy off the shelf, then you can always buy something off the shelf and say, here's our process, and you write it down over here, and then it's implemented in this system that we rented from somebody else. But there's always going to be a gap there between how that system was designed for people like you, not for you specifically. And so I think at that size of hundreds of employees, it starts getting very interesting to, well, you can actually feel the benefits of closing that gap in onboarding and training for systems and processes.
So I'm going to show you how little I know, but enough to be dangerous. Low code, no code software.
Mm-hmm.
Be able to build custom design. Is that something that you're familiar with? And does that make sense for smaller companies to perhaps consider? And maybe you can tell our audience what low code, no code is. I could too, but I'm sure you could do a better job.
Sure. Yeah, I think so. Low code, no code, to me, it's not an area I've gone kind of super deep into, but it really is using tools that exist out there to create custom workflows and designs that, so it's really, there's a lot of API driven things out there and a lot of tools that just allow you to build user interfaces or string one thing to get if that, then this sort of stuff. And I do think that those have their place, and you should the idea there is that it's a very low barrier to entry. So you don't need somebody like me who has an old-fashioned computer science degree. So what,
but at the, on the other hand, what you can do is you can play with pilot test functionality and then take that and then do real code.
Yes. And that's where I was headed too. I think it's a very good kind of beginning layer to prove things out. Because one of my core kind of ideas is when it comes to building very serious software platforms, you should be replacing something. You don't, it's not speculative, right? You need to have evidence that this area of your business is worth modeling that thoroughly.
Yeah. And for the audience to know, low code, no code is sort of, it is a platform that just makes it super easy for people that don't know programming to program. The problem with it is at scale. And when I mean at scale, when you have a lot of users, it tends not to function well. It tends to go really slow because the platform is doing more than good software would do, because good software is
doing the least amount possible.
Doing the least amount possible. So don't all run out and Google low code, no code, and say, this is my solution. But let's shift into the world of training. Everything you're saying, I agree with from a training perspective, because a lot of times you can buy a lot of off-the-shelf training, but at the same time, if you're going to figure in the cost of the training you're buying, the cost, and this is what I think most people don't figure, is the cost of the time of the student, right? To not have something that is very specific to your company, your culture, doesn't make sense, because you want to train people on your company's way of doing business, whether it's you're training people on hiring, coaching, management, succession planning, or whether you're training people on product or sales or operations and things of that nature. And learning management systems, and last I counted, and I joke because I've never counted, but the last I read, there are like 9,000 learning management systems out there, and my company alone has 5.
Yeah, there's got to be at least 9,000 out there.
Oh yeah, there are a lot, and we were joking before the show that there's some that are really old and really bad. But what is your thought on learning management systems, and what are some of the advantages of like building your own?
Well, yeah, I think that again, it really comes back to scale, like you said, with the low code, no code stuff. It's the same thing when you're doing a huge volume of training, and I think ultimately I'm just going to end up reinforcing what you summarized earlier about the idea that if you have an LMS that is that you have to wade through a lot of complexity, that just to discard it, just so you can understand it, so you know not to use it, what not to do. That sort of unnecessary complexity really is the hidden kind of hidden risk in a lot of software implementations. LMSs are a great example of that, because they're going to have every feature you can think of, and probably way more that you never thought of, and you maybe don't even need to think of, right? But that doesn't just flow down, or it doesn't just sit with the people responsible for the implementation. It also cascades out too, because everybody else, when they take the training, there's a lot of overhead there. So I think that I guess this is why I ended up owning a custom software company that's celebrating 10 years in business now. It's because I really think that there's something that makes each organization really unique, and they have a culture and a worldview that matters, or they wouldn't exist. And if that stuff's in jeopardy, then they may not exist for that much longer. But why not go back to that source for each of the engagements that you're taking on, whether it's implementing an LMS or modeling something else using custom software? You go back to that source and make sure that you're pulling all of that identity and those values and that worldview and culture, you're pulling that forward and implementing it as directly as possible. Because organizations are playing a pretty long-term game. This stuff adds up, not just at the scale of people that are going to take training this year, but that of the people that will replace all of those people at some point too, right? Because the turnover is just the thing that happens over time. And so we're considering far out into the future. I think you can get a lot of economies there.
I would concur with you that most LMSs have far more feature and functionality than most people really need. And it's almost like people get addicted to why not, but why not is a distraction. Right.
Well said. Well said. Yeah. There's a sense of security that comes with having a huge list of features that you may or may not need. And even if you know you don't need them, well, just in case, right? But there's the hidden cost of, well, this thing is going to be bringing with it a fair amount of unnecessary complexity, and maybe we're well suited to manage that in this instance. Depends on the organization, depends on the LMS, but it's very much worth considering and trying to make as much of that hidden complexity clear and own it and choose to own it instead of just inheriting a kind of hidden burden.
Just a plug for Tortal. We really pride ourselves in usability and simplicity and the ability to hide stuff that people don't need, so that that's clear. But I want to kind of shift gears here. People talk about the future of training, and I'm going to share what I see the future of training to be. It's actually here, because good companies are doing this now, and that's just-in-time training. And having training exist at the point where it's needed, as opposed to living in the LMS. Now, that doesn't mean you can't use an LMS to track who's done what training, or the LMS to be the place that the training is generated from. But really good companies have QR codes by equipment that's complex that people need to know, how to use. So you can go and use your phone or an iPad and click on a QR code and have that training show up. You can create software, so if you have a CRM or something of that nature, where you can put in, training modules that people click on right inside the software, all interacting with the LMS, but are just-in-time training. So that people that, instead of saying to somebody, or maybe you say, hey, here's a training course on this software, but to allow people to easily get back and get refreshed, or to train as they go or train as they need to go, that just-in-time in the right place, to me is going to be very big.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And what it makes me think of too is that I think it dovetails pretty nicely with my custom software world, in that we're working, when creating these project management systems, whatever it might be, again, bringing data, tools, workflows, different roles together. We're working to learn about all of those complex processes and push that guidance into the tools, so that in some sense, there is a spirit of just-in-time training there, because it's trying to tell you not just what to do, but what to care about, and what the order of operations is, what priorities are. And those are things that I think a good software implementation, custom or not, is going to be able to support you in that.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask a question of personal privilege because I'm the host of the show.
Sure.
I go to the airport and I see these airlines and they are using code from the last century, some in COBOL, which for those of you that don't know has not been the primary code for at least 20 some odd years. And they're creating GUI interfaces so it looks like it's modern software, but it's so old.
It's very not.
Why do they do that? I know it's hard to transition, but why in the world?
One of the things that I've learned,
keep that stuff up.
Yeah, one of the things that I've learned is that once something is working and people depend on it, nobody wants to change it. Yeah. There's a lot of risk associated with that change. And not only are people, well, because once it starts really working and you're depending on it and everybody's depending on it, it becomes invisible. And I think that's the, traffic lights running on COBOL or whatever. It's like, well, it was the right tool for the job and the job hasn't changed really since then, right? And, I'm not really that into traffic light programming, so I may be a little bit wrong there, but but I think that principle is generally true, that and this is something that is interesting to navigate too, because you do need to modernize and maintain and upgrade any system that exists. It's just, do you want to pay that cost all at once at some unknown place in the future when it's kind of an emergency? Or do you do that a little bit at a time and kind of incorporate that into your view of ownership of that software system?
What you're saying, I think, is true of software, is also true of training, which is you're paying one way or the other. Right.
Yep,
so in the case of training, you can pay to train people right and have effectiveness, or you can choose not to train. And then you pay in the price of having ineffectiveness, inefficiencies, lack of sales, people hurt on the job. And in software, you can either do it right, or you're going to pay for people that are using inefficient software that's not giving you the right information, doing the right things. You've been saying this, but not directly, but I'll say it directly, which is, one of the keys is to really plan and think through what you need. And the benefit of custom software is you can literally do exactly what you need.
Yeah, it's a greatest strength, greatest weakness thing, because you have to, right? Yeah. And it can go really wrong. But the other side is, well, you get to make it very personalized to your environment. And one of my favorite ways to help people look at that is to think about the tools that we're building, the platforms that we're building or implementing, either one, as parts of our digital work environment. It's where people's minds live. It's where our employees' minds live all the time. And we want those places where their minds live to be to be friendly, accessible, useful, all of the things, right? Yeah. And we really have that opportunity and responsibility, whether it's an implementation or a custom software project, but you go that much deeper with the risk and reward, I would say, is higher with custom software. But yeah, no, I'm with you on that one.
So, Ian, you're very clearly bright person, and I think I like your attitude, and I think there are a lot of people who'd be really interested in knowing more about your company and what you do, how you work with people, who are your ideal clients.
Sure.
Because I guarantee you people listening have problems with software somewhere in their business.
Yeah. So we tend to focus on professional services firms that have these kind of experts in departments in their organizations, where there's a real opportunity to do better with software than what's available off the shelf. We're working with clients in the construction world right now, and have done a fair amount in healthcare as well. So we're kind of all over the place and a little bit industry agnostic, though I'd love to just pick an industry. It makes things so much easier. But we're all over the place. And the way that we work with our clients, we sit down really off the bat, it's a framing engagement where we help you figure out the strategy there.
Yeah.
And we, from there, think about it as a foundation that we're building and then a growth phase. So it captures a lot of what we've been talking about today, in that we want to be transparent and helpful in helping our clients understand the opportunities, the risks, the rewards, the ownership, not now, but also over time. And what does it look like to get something solid under your feet? Then actually doing that and then growing and adapting. I almost think of it as systems renewal over time. So you've got to constantly pay into that bucket of renewal, whatever form that takes, or else you'll end up in a bad looking for COBOL programmers in 2022. Right. So
some COBOL programmers are really really well paid because there's such a shortage.
Absolutely.
I learned on Fortran, so but there appears to be no demand for that.
Yeah.
So how do people reach you? And just bear in mind that most people are not getting the show notes.
Sure.
So, your company's got a cool name, but not necessarily easy to spell. Your website would be cool.
Sure. Yeah. Our website's enlivenhq.com. That's ENLIVENHQ.com. And you can find me on
one more time.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Enlivenhq.com.
Okay.
ENLIVENHQ.com. And you can find me on LinkedIn. It's Ian Robinson. And yeah, be happy to chat.
We're at the end, but we end with a very special thing at this show, which is one tip. If you have one tip to share with the audience, what would your one tip be?
Yeah, and I think this is in keeping with the theme here. There's a quote from an architect that I'll paraphrase, who said that the one job in architecture is to make a space that's reassuring and on at least a subconscious level. So a human is in the space, they should be at least subconsciously reassured. I think that's a wonderful way to look at both software implementations and custom software builds, because when you're looking at your environment, again, worldview, values, culture, identity, put yourself in the place of your employee and try to make sure that what you're implementing is something that's very that's reassuring, and which makes it kind of a three-dimensional, like a real thing. So that exercise, the result means different things to different people.
I'm hearing empathy.
Absolutely. Yeah, empathy and compassion are kind of at the root of all of these practices, I think, because it just roots out unnecessary complexity, right? If you actually understand the situation somebody's in and what their motivations are, hey, we can focus on that. We kind of don't have to focus on any, like all the other details, right? So, yeah.
So, Ian, thank you for being a guest. I want to thank my listeners for listening. Without you, there would not be a show. Of course, thank you to C-Suite TV and radio. Everyone have a great day.
Training Unleashed is brought to you by Tortal Training, specializing in e-learning and interactive online training solutions for corporate, government, nonprofit, and franchise organizations. Tortal makes effective training easier. Just go to Tortal.net to gain access to real-world tools that can make a difference. That's Tortal.net. Tortal. Tortal.net.